Helicopters have been in War Thunder for a while now, and despite them being problematic for the vast majority of that time, I've been hesitant to talk about them. As I've said before, I'm primarily a tank player. I do play planes with some regularity, but not enough to really consider myself an expert on their gameplay. Besides naval, helicopters are my least played vehicle type. While helicopters have been the bane of my existence when I play tanks, I don't think it'd be fair to call them overpowered across the board. So to get a fully developed idea of the dynamic between tanks and helicopters, I tried to play helis a bit more. In addition to looking at the opinions of helicopter players, my conclusion was that helicopters aren't fun for anyone. They simply do not create gameplay scenarios that are fun or interesting. If you're just spawning in and a helicopter with rockets shows up, there's not a whole lot you can do. It might be too high up to shoot with your gun or machine guns. Either that, or an ATGM heli could be camping your spawn later into the game. As a helicopter, you'll usually get smacked right away by a SAM, at least if you spawn in later. You could also get killed by some planets camping the helicopter base, or crash due to server issues. In all of these scenarios, there is basically no room for counterplay. You are almost entirely at the mercy of the other player. I think this is where most of the frustration with helicopters comes from. There are some things that can be done to slightly negate these issues, but it's using a band-aid for a situation that requires a tourniquet. I said earlier that helicopters weren't overpowered across the board, but there are definitely a few that deserve that title. The AH-1G, for example, is probably the most overpowered starter heli. It doesn't get ATGMs like a lot of the other ones do, but it does get two 40mm grenade launchers that fire HEDP. Against light vehicles in particular, the 40mm are devastating. It also gets a ton of rockets. A single AH-1G can wipe out half a team, right as they're coming out of spawn. To Gaijin, this isn't an issue, because they actively promote it. Even if the AH-1 doesn't kill anything, the 40mm are very effective at destroying components like barrels, engines, fuel tanks, and tracks. Flying at treetop level, the amount of time you have to react to a Cobra is significantly reduced. The same can be said for other helis that rush with rockets and cannons. When you get to higher tier helis, there are, I would say, three main culprits. I shouldn't need to tell you that the Ka-50 is one of them. From a stat perspective, it doesn't seem like an outlier. It doesn't have any thermal imaging, and gets less ATGMs than the Apache. While the Ka-50 does get less missiles, they are much more powerful than Hellfires. They outrange Hellfires by around 2 kilometers, and can also be used against aircraft. The Ka-50 is also extremely durable, being able to take multiple direct hits from MBTs. Its entire tail can be shot off and it will still operate normally. The second helicopter, the Ka-52, is essentially the same story. Only difference is, it gets rockets that are insanely good. Then there's the Tiger UHT, which is arguably the most overpowered helicopter in the game. The Tiger has access to 8 PARS 3 missiles, which are fire and forget. You can essentially just mouse over the enemy team while pressing spacebar, duck behind cover, and get upwards of 3 or 4 kills. Most helis only get 1 or 2 kills, because you have to sit out of cover and laze the target. The Tiger is an exception to that rule. If you rebalance these helis in particular, that would go a long way towards making helicopters more bearable. These particular helicopters have very few counters. The only way to keep them from doing tons of damage is to essentially dedicate yourself to being an anti-air player. IFVs can also stop first spawn helis, but later into the game, when ATGM helis show up, it's a different story. Being your team's personal SAM site isn't always a fun time though. Sometimes no planes or helis will spawn in, or you'll die right away, because the enemy team can see into your spawn. I am perfectly content to do nothing but play an anti-air vehicle, but I'm not most people. Well, that's the situation in Ground RB. Heli EC isn't much better. I haven't tried to play it since 2019, and man, was that a good decision. As expected, Ka-50s completely dominate. In the games I played, it was every nation versus every nation, for I believe 2 reasons. 1, not enough people want to actually play the game mode, and 2, if Ka-50s were only on one team, there wouldn't be any contest. When 2 Ka-50s fight, it comes down to whoever fires the most missiles. Seriously. It's the dumbest thing I've seen in a while. I don't know why Ka-50s are fighting things like Hueys either. Seems like a major disparity in capability. Beyond just rebalancing some helicopters, how could you make them more fun overall? For starters, I would rework helicopter damage models, so that they're a lot more fragile. Helicopters shouldn't be tanking main gun rounds. I would also raise the spawn point cost for helicopters, but just enough so they can't rush with rockets at the start of a match. I would also redesign maps so the helicopters have more options for attack. Some maps have hills that you can hide behind, others are completely flat. It is very inconsistent. When it comes to helicopter game modes, separating battle ratings would help a lot. I would also reintroduce domination. EC is honestly pretty bland, and you barely get anything from it. I'm having trouble coming up with ideas, so I'd like to see what you guys come up with. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one.